Said something to sign. Right, Cass? Good. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Hillsborough Township Planning Board meeting of October 13th, 2022. Please join me in a salute to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be advised this meeting has been duly advertised according to Section 5 of the Open Public Meeting Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975, otherwise known as Sunshine Law. Notice of the 2022 annual meeting schedule has been provided to the officially designated newspapers, the Township Clerk, posted on the Township's website, and available here at the Hillsborough Township Municipal Complex. In addition, application documents have been made available on the Township Civic Clerk website, and complete application files are available in the Planning and Zoning Department for inspection in accordance with the public meeting notice. That may have roll call of board members and board and township professionals.
Mr. Wagner, Mr. Santa Romita, and Mr. Scopo are absent. Mr. Peason,
Present.
Mr. Hestag,
Here.
Mr. Ciccarelli,
Here.
Ms. Smith,
Here.
Committeeman Delcor,
Here.
Mayor Lapati,
Here.
Vice Chair Julian,
Here.
Chair Sirachi,
Here.
Mr. Maskey, here, Mr. Hack,
Here.
Mr. DeSessa,
Here.
Cass, here, and I'm here.
Excellent. First up, we have consideration of the October 6, 2022 meeting minutes. Who's eligible to vote? Do we have that?
I got it.
You got it? Okay.
Mr. Peason, Hestag, Ciccarelli, Delcor, Lapati, Julian.
Okay, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Peason,
Yes.
Mr. Hestag,
Yes.
Mr. Ciccarelli,
Yes.
Committeeman Delcor,
Yes.
Mayor Lapati,
Yes.
Vice Chair Julian.
Yes.
Thank you. We do not have any resolutions for consideration, nor planning board business, and no considerations of ordinances, so we will move to business from the floor for matters not on this evening's agenda, and I will remind that we have a 5-minute time limit, and also to just please refrain from commenting on any active applications. So if anyone would like to provide any comments to the board at this time, you may come forward. Okay, seeing none, we are going to move on to what we have at the main event tonight is public hearing continuation. The application Harvard Way, JMJ4 LLC, with a file number of 21-PB-09-MSPV with a time of decision of October 31st of this year. And this application is continued from the June 9th, 2022 meeting without further notice. So,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
I've been recused from the other hearings on this application and would like to be recused from this one.
You may. You don't need my permission.
Oh, I thought I did.
No, you don't. All right.
Small public comment.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Mike Ogrodnik. I'm an attorney at Savo, Shaw, Corsini, Warner, Gillespie, Ogrodnik, and Fisher in Somerville. I'm here on behalf of the applicant seeking preliminary and final site plan approval for the construction of a 107,366 square foot industrial building on the southern end of Harvard Way, Block 58, Lot 1.01, on a vacant 9.1 acre parcel. Subject is located in the Industrial 3 Zone District, and the proposed use is a permitted principal use in the I3 zone, with ingress and egress provided at an intersection directly onto Route 206 North. As indicated in prior hearings, preliminary and final approval was already granted for development of this lot and the adjacent lot under application 1988 PB16SR. Resolution grant memorializing the development of these sites was adopted on June 9th, 1988, which granted subdivision approval and development for these lots. However, only phase 1 was completed on lot 1.08 and the construction of a detention basin on 1.09, which is the subject lot. Surrounded by industrial uses, including plastics manufacturer and laboratory adjacent to the subject property. There's 6 hearing on this. At the November hearing of last year, we had testimony from Greg Reddington, the owner, from John McDonough, our planner, and from Betsy Dolan, our traffic engineer. Mr. Ford then testified as the civil engineer, and we discussed permitted uses in the I-2 zone, as well as the necessary variances. There are 3 variances. The one variance is a C variance for height, 35 feet is allowable, and you can keep it as a C variance if you go only 10% above that, so it's a 38.4 foot height, which is variance from 188-106E. There's a proposed fire lane within the buffer. This is in relation to a requirement from the Hillsborough Fire Marshal asking for emergency access around the perimeter of the building, which is proposed to be accomplished using a grass finish that has a sub base that can support a fire truck. This is a emergency access is not required by code, but we provided that in light of this and other applications where the fire marshal seeks to have a secondary access around the perimeter of the building. This would necessitate a C bulk variance pursuant to 188-106E. However, again, it should be emphasized that this is a grass covering access lane. So while it's within the buffer, it does meet buffer planting requirements, which states at 188-38C, quote, all buffer areas and conservation easements as appropriate shall be planted and maintained with either grass or ground cover. So the only encroachment is a grass area. So I think I would describe that as a technical variance. It just happens to be able to support the subbase, support a fire truck. So the last one is a tree removal variance. We're at 66.02% of on-site trees proposed to be removed. The original design of this project had tree removal less than 60% and conforming. That can still be done. However, the Environmental Commission and the board over the last year has asked to expand the capacity of the detention basin. So the expansion of the detention basin requires some additional removal of trees. We then had a meeting on January 13th. We went through our architecture with Robert Martinez and then introduced Mike Ford, who testified as to the site condition, began cross-examination from Objectors Council. The March 10th, 2022 hearing, Objectors Council cross-examined our civil engineer for the entire night. And then at the April 14th hearing, the Objectors Council introduced Dr. Clay Emerson from Princeton Hydro, who testified for the remainder of that hearing. On June 9th, Dr. Emerson also provided further expert testimony, specifically related to geotech and stormwater design. Objectors Council also introduced Marianne Suede on behalf of the Green Hills community. Mr. Ford was then introduced to rebut Dr. Emerson's memo and provided expert testimony related again to the stormwater detention, wet basin design, adding additional water quality treatment for the public right-of-way catch basins, and testimony that the stormwater wet basin is full compliance with the regulation and in fact far exceeds NJDP related requirements related to reduction in peak flow in the 210 and 100-year storms. Mr. Ford testified that for the 2-year storm, 8.8 CFS is permitted and 2.6 is proposed. 10-year storm, 25.9 CFS is permitted and 9.7 is proposed. And for the 100-year storm, 62.3 CFS is permitted and 34.5 is proposed. Board engineer Drew DeSessa indicated that, in his opinion, it was in compliance with the stormwater regs. There was then direction from Committeeman Delcourt as to some of the issues raised in the expert's objector report as compared to our expert from Whitestone, Kyle Kopaz, our professional engineer from Whitestone, regarding the classifications of the soil. So there was a direction given that Pannoni, Drew DeSessa's engineering firm, would review all the reports, do a deep dive into the reports, and then if Pannoni felt that additional testing was necessary, then there would be another rounds of field testing. And that's what happened. So on August 24th and 25th, Pannoni was, asked to oversee, specifically focusing on stormwater management related to water quality, quantity, and groundwater recharge, as well as I mentioned, the hydrological soil group classifications under the state stormwater management regulations. On August 24th and 25th, Whitestone conducted, I think it was the third or fourth supplemental investigation into soils at the direction of Chairman Sirachi. Princeton Hydro was invited to and witnessed all of the testing, and that resulted in an October 3rd. It resulted in a Whitestone report dated September 1st, and then an analysis of all of the soil conditions memorialized in an October 3rd engineering memorandum from Mr. DeSessa. In its relevant part, Mr. DeSessa concluded that he agreed with the Whitestone's conclusions, quote, that the subject site consists of an upper clay layer underlain by a less transmissive weathered bedrock, and that the subject site can be classified as HSGD, resulting in no groundwater recharge being required, close quote. Report also states that, open quote, the proposed design in accordance with the regulations based on the applicant's stormwater report calculations, peak flows for the design storms meet the requirements required and are actually being reduced more than required for the 210 and 100-year storms. And the applicant has provided a stormwater management design that meets the requisite reductions in peak flows as required by the stormwater management regulations. So I had a discussion with Mr. Hack, the board attorney, and he had advised that we should introduce Mr. Kopaz to make his reports part of the record. So we have, I'd like to swear in and qualify Kyle Kopaz from Whitestone.
Can I introduce myself and what I'm doing here? You guys will wait till after.
Guidance.
I'm sorry, what did you just?
I would like to make my introduction for the night as well.
Yeah, I think he has.
Yeah.
Do it now or do it after this.
Chair, I think you should go first.
You go first.
All right, so as most people here know, my name is Jordan Ash with the law firm Ash Legal in Westwood. I represent the Green Hills Community Group, which is the objector to this application. My client consists of a group of concerned citizens that seeks to protect their family homes. And frankly, they're terrified of the flooding that has happened and in all likelihood will continue to happen due to various issues. Ida was not a year, maybe it was a year ago now. This was going for a long time, but storms will continue to happen. As Dr. Emerson did testify in his direct, this proposal as designed will exacerbate flooding issues. It will increase the peak flow rate for the full drainage area. With that in mind, and knowing that the applicant must justify all waivers and variances, and their own planning expert agreed that flooding is one of the most fundamental purposes of zoning, that no variance waivers can be given with those two facts being true. In addition, the one variance about the trees, the language from the town ordinance is that in no event shall a variance be given from this 60% threshold. In terms of the stormwater management rules, the applicant has throughout this process said that they comply. They continue not to comply despite their continued efforts, despite everything that has transpired. And this is not my opinion. This is not Dr. Emerson's opinion. This is not Mr. DeSessa's opinion. This is nobody's in this room's opinion, unless somebody in this room happens to be with the DEP, because these rules are DEP rules that are black and white and they must be complied with, and they're not. Additionally, certain analysis still haven't been provided for water quality, such as the water budget analysis. And just circling back, the issue with the recharge continues to be that the testing is insufficient to meet the rules. Not opinion, the rules. One other thing of note, I note from Mr. DeSessa's letter that it is commented more than once that DEP will review this project, and they will. And they will give this a level of scrutiny that DEP does. But this board cannot rely on DEP to enforce the stormwater management rules. This board has a duty to enforce those rules and to enforce its own township ordinances. The applicant has had several bites at the apple, and they continue to fall short. And for those reasons, and for the testimony that's been provided and that will be provided tonight, the board should deny this application.
Mr. Chairman, just one item before I forget. I have two certifications here indicating that Board Member Neil Julian has reviewed the video of the meetings of April the 14th of 2022 and June the 9th of 2022, and he's familiar with all the exhibits. So therefore, if we reach that point tonight, he would be eligible to vote.
Great, thank you.
You swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes,
The record states by name, please.
sure. Kyle Kopez, Kopacz.
Kyle, first and foremost, could you give the board a benefit of your educational experience?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as I stated, my name is Kyle Kopez. I've been working with Whitestone Associates, and I'm an associate there for a little over a decade. I went to school undergrad at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, specializing in civil engineering. I got my master's degree from Norwich University, specializing in geotechnical engineering. I'm a licensed professional engineer in both New Jersey and New York, and my license is currently in good standing.
And why don't you just walk us through, from when you retained?
We haven't said yes or no yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You give us our chance. But first, I always ask the one question: has any of your licenses ever lapsed or been suspended?
No.
Okay. Turn, any objections from board members? I see a lot of head shakes no, so we will accept.
So
Thank you.
when were you retained by the applicant to conduct a geotechnical analysis on the subject lot?
Our initial mobilization to this site took place in November of 2020, well prior to any of the BMP manual new updates coming into effect. With that said, we always strive to be in compliance with any requirement, whether it be state, municipality, county, you name it. So we were initially engaged in November of 2020, where we did a preliminary study, a toe dip, if you will. Go out to the site just to see what are our limiting factors. What are the site conditions, just from a 10,000 foot view, let's say. What might limit us from a development standpoint, and what's going to hinder us down the road. We had multiple discussions with the applicant, and if you actually look through our first report, which I believe was A1, is that correct? A1, our conclusion was that the site, despite our efforts from a preliminary standpoint, was not conducive to infiltration. We had a lot of difficulty performing those tests, and maybe on the off chance a basin flood test would work, but quite frankly, we were very skeptical, and we're consistent with the fact that we did not think any infiltration was going to be feasible at this site. As the new stormwater regulations came out, we were again contacted by the applicant, and they asked that we do supplemental testing to confirm this. There were new rules, new requirements for a number of tests, specifically from a hydrologic soil group standpoint. It is mapped as right now, as we speak, as is Class C. We were confident that it was a Group D. So we went out to the site, performed our initial round of testing, and came to the conclusion that it was indeed a D-type soil. After comments were made by the board and the board's engineer, I guess some supplemental testing to confirm this was questioned or warranted. We're more than happy to go out again, remobilize. We did 18 additional test locations with 18 additional lab samples, confirming again our initial from the second report and our belief from the beginning that it was a hydrologic soil group D classification. Infiltration would not be possible. Again, upon the board's review and the board engineer's review and testimony given by the opposition, and an effort, quite honestly, by us and Whitestone to be transparent, I or our company are not too proud to ever want to get the right answer. If someone else thinks the right answer is correct, I'll be more than willing to listen. That is the goal of engineering at the end of the day is to make things right. So if it's all right with you, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit our September 1st, 2022 report as Exhibit A4, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, it's A4, and I believe all of the other Whitestone reports have been entered into evidence, but I just, for the record, want to officially enter all the Whitestone reports. I believe there's a series of reports, and the last one is dated September 1st, 2022.
I'm going to make an objection to this new report.
It's good. Yeah.
I'm going to make an objection to this new report on the basis that it being dated September 1st, 2022, presumably being provided to Mr. DeSessa on that same date, and then Mr. DeSessa providing his opinion with regard to that report, and the report not having been provided to the objector despite all of the calls for transparency until the day Mr. DeSessa's report came out.
When was that?
October 3rd, I believe.
Is anyone
They were
denying
submitted,
that?
they were submitted days, within 10 days, which is the requirement. And frankly, it's really my oversight because Kyle was communicating directly with Pannoni, and I wasn't involved in that communication. When when we're preparing for this meeting, I sent everything over within the timeframes to council, which is under the rule. It's in the ordinance. It's at least 10 days prior, and it was submitted 10 days prior, and it was posted online.
Am I to understand now that despite everything, all the calls for transparency, there were communications between the board engineer and the applicant's engineer, and we were cut out from those communications?
I can't testify to that.
All right.
You just said that.
Well, let's hear it from the engineer.
I'm making an objection now. I'm not cross-examining, so I'm
No,
just-
but I want to get on record because I'm not, the attorney's not a witness. If you could describe the extent of the conversations.
Sure. Prior to our mobilization of the site or after the issuance of the reports?
Everything related up to the, that went.
Okay,
this
so
report.
where I left off before the objection, we were asked again by the board and the board engineer and the objector's expert to remobilize to the site, and everyone was invited, all parties, and all parties attended. We were prepared, Whitestone was, for whatever infiltration test methodology laid out in the BMP that we already knew weren't going to work. But whatever the board engineer directed us to, or the board engineer's representative rather, whatever they requested we do on site, we were prepared. Whether it be single ring infiltration testing, a lot of the methodologies were previously discussed here, basin flood testing, tube permeameter testing, a lot of in situ or in the field tests, which were what we were trying to do and what we were trying to prove.
I just want
we're
to pause
prepared.
because I just want to get, getting back with the lines of communication, getting back to it. So you were just communicating with Drew here.
I guess at this point, I forget the gentleman's last name, but Rodrigue from your office.
Well, okay.
Yes,
With the
Pannoni
board
and
engineer's
the board
office.
engineer representative, absolutely.
Okay.
They had actually reached out to myself to discuss and review the report. And I had gone back and recommended, and I believe through Mr. Ogrodnik, that at least setting up through the process up until the field date was all set up and all parties were involved.
Okay. So when we say
And I'm not-
parties, I'm just trying to,
We were on.
Okay.
Dr. Everson was on some.
Mr. Ash, can you come?
If I need to-
Why don't you use this other microphone? so that-
yeah, just saying.
I'm not standing here and telling you that we were on no communications. We were on some communications leading up to the August 24th, I believe it was, site exploration. What I've just been made to understand, though, is that were communications that we were not involved with, that seemed to be based on what was said after that. And that's now part of my objection as well.
I'm not aware of any obligation for a civil engineer to include an objector's attorney in every communication.
We were here last time. The board was very specific about wanting everything above board, everything transparent, so we could all talk about what we needed to happen, how we could comply with these rules. And it seems that we were, I would go as far as to say purposefully cut out, because not only do they still not comply, but it's the rule. It's not an opinion. It's the rules. And we could have had these conversations. We could have these conversations throughout the month of September, but we didn't. And that seems to have been done with a purpose.
Okay, well, I'm sure when Mr. Emerson testifies, or cross-examines, or he'll make that apparent, so.
Okay, so moving back to our field investigation, our fourth mobilization to the site at this
Matter of procedure, are we accepting the proposed exhibit?
I have no, I'm gonna ask, I have no grounds, not that,
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask
I
Dave,
don't
Mr.
I
Ma-
don't think that there are any grounds
Yeah.
not to accept it. It was submitted in a timely fashion to the board.
Speak closer.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's any basis not to accept it. It was submitted in a timely fashion to the board, 10 days. It was presumably uploaded to the web portal as well. It was available for all to see at that point. So I don't see any reason not to accept it.
Mr. Maskey, that we got it in 10 days?
Yes.
Okay. So we're gonna allow it, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So upon our fourth mobilization, with three separate parties being in attendance, again, Whitestone was prepared to perform any or multiple different types of field infiltration testing, knowing full well that the majority, if not all of them, were not applicable for this site, but still wanted to prove to the board engineer and objectors professional that this was the case. We mobilized to the site, excavated 3 test locations ranging in variable depths. And for the first location, at the direction of Pannoni, we did what's called a basin flood test. This is actually outside of the upper 40 inches of soil, so isn't really applicable from a hydrologic soil group standpoint. But we wanted to, and as we've made clear before, if it came back, as a Group C classification, we were willing to do a design to accommodate Type C soils. So again, this was a fact-finding mission to again prove we are doing the right thing from a soil and an infiltration standpoint. We want to get the answer correct at the end of the day. We performed a basin flood test in accordance with the BMP manual and returned over 12 hours later for another reading indicating that the basin flood test had failed. So the underlying rock at the site, water can't infiltrate in through it. It's going to sit there. This is at a depth approximately of just over 5 feet. So we then went to other portions of the site and scattered across the site. Keep in mind, this was conducted in August, as Mr. Ogrodnik mentioned. We had one of the driest summers in New Jersey that we've seen for a long time. There was still standing water all across the site. If this site was a hydrologic soil group C, there would be some level of infiltration. There would not be standing water. And this effectively, Mother Nature was giving us our surficial infiltration test. It was showing us that the fine grained materials at the surface are not infiltrating, let alone getting down to the bedrock that will not infiltrate. We walked across the site, Whitestone multiple times iterated and requested if supplemental testing was required, if we wanted to look for other methodologies, other areas. We walked the site, showed the entirety of the property. It was concluded by the 3 parties there that the basin flood test was sufficient. We had adequately proved that the upper site soils are fine grained, not infiltrating, and the bedrock is a massive substratum, not infiltrating. And so we closed up the hole the following day and moved on after the basin flood test. In my correspondence with Pannoni, they had actually sent, and maybe this will provide some clarification to the objection, Rodrigo, who I'd mentioned before, and Pannoni, had reached out to me directly asking for the report, which I provided. There was no intent. It was not instigated by Whitestone or by any other party. It was actually asked by the board engineer, and I provided to the people on that correspondence. We then submitted, as Mr. Ogrodnik said, 10 days later. So there's no effort, ill will, or malice towards anyone else. Again, we just wanted to provide the information to the board engineer for them to review. And I believe that is the conclusion of our site activities.
I have nothing further for the witness.
Thank you. How do you pronounce your last name, sir? I don't want to get it wrong.
Kopez.
Kopez. All right, Mr. Kopez, I don't want to keep you here long. I think we can be very short. At least I hope so. You said you did 1 basin flood test on this site. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Did you do any other BMP-approved infiltration tests?
Not infiltration tests, no.
Not on the entire site?
That is correct, because as we established on our last mobilization, the majority of the infiltration tests, particularly for the upper 40 inches and hydrologic soil group reclassification, were not applicable. So we actually, if you'd like to read through Exhibit
No, that's okay.
A3.
I just want to clarify. So your testimony is that you comply with the BMP to change the entire site soils from D to C based on your single infiltration test and other site observations that are not infiltration tests.
That is correct. If I may, in the engineering
That's all I have.
handbook, and this is a direct quote, in some cases, saturated
Sir, you answered the
hydraulic
question.
conductivity data are not always readily available or obtainable. In these situations, other soil properties such as texture, compaction, bulk density, strength of soil structure, and clay mineralogy may be used for determination. We, in accordance with the BMP manual, which references the engineering handbook, as well as the New Jersey Administrative Code, performed several hydrometer tests, I would say upwards of 30 probably at this point, consistent with the findings that we found initially. That, in conjunction with the failed basin flood test, gives us confidence that we are in compliance with the BMP manual.
But just to clarify, after all that, it's still one infiltration test. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Thank you.
Any questions from board members? Okay, so may I motion to open to public?
So, but I guess I'd like to understand you cited some of the additional BMP requirements there, and I think you said something that if other options or testing was not available or could not be completed, what was not completable or available that allowed you to do just the one infiltration test?
Sure. So the way bedrock works in this area, particularly sedimentary rock, is it gradually gets more weathered and more weathered as you move up. So in this case, the bedrock will flake off and you'll work into a weathered rock layer and then the natural site soils. On this site in particular, it's very gravelly, bony, difficult to dig through, difficult to seat a lot of these tests. The testing methodologies that they lay out, you're trying to do an in situ representation of vertical water moving down through the soil. And as it infiltrates both vertically and horizontally, you're trying to get a representative sample of that. This includes a couple different things like setting a PVC pipe, trying to hand dig an excavation to where the soils are uniform throughout the entirety of the excavation. Another one is a tube permeameter test where you can drive a tube and take the sample back for laboratory testing. All these methodologies, which we confirmed in our last mobilization, weren't giving true or adequate representations of the site soils, particularly when we take something like a tube permeameter. There were chunks of angled rock that are crooked, sticking out, and then when you run the laboratory test, it's not actually accurate to what's there. So the field testing methodologies that were laid out didn't really lend themselves to what the actual site conditions were. And that's why we went back and we agreed as a team on site during that last mobilization. The standing water from the rain, which was, we actually looked at it, I believe it was 5 days prior when the last rainstorm had happened, there was still standing water superficially. So this site is not infiltrating. And again, we wanted to do the test. We were aiming to do the test. They just weren't physically representative of what the site conditions were. And the board engineer, I don't want to speak for him, but on site, they'd agreed as such.
And there was no other practices that were available that could have been used other than what you had done originally?
Yes, sir. We were prepared for all of them, quite frankly. We were ready to do the tests, and the site conditions didn't lend themselves to that. And that's why we elected to go with the basin flood test, just to see, we thought let's say soils, the water could get through the upper site soils. It was eventually going to hit that bedrock and hopefully infiltrate, or if not, it was just going to sit there. And that's why we went with that direction. It was a very heavy lift. You have to mobilize a lot of water to the site. It's very time consuming. Again, Whitestone was prepared for multiple different, if not all, BMP tests, and the site just didn't lend itself to that.
And so what we're struggling with is, the initial reports that we got, we heard pretty convincing testimony that they weren't compliant with DEP's best practices and what needed to be done. Is it your testimony that all the testing that you had done was compliant with best practices?
That is correct, from day one. If you'd like me to reread the engineering handbook.
I just wanted you to
language.
state that on the record, that's all.
Yes, sir. All testing has been done in compliance with
Because,
DEP and engineering
I'm
handbook.
sure there will be someone else that will, but I wanted to, because I'll be honest with you, from the testimony we had heard, it sounds like that may not have been the case. And that was pretty, the reports that we were able to read didn't seem they got us to where we needed to be.
Understood.
Just the report or the testing that you did on August, the 3 pits that you did, the 3 that you let, just to understand the test that was done, that you were with, were you there monitoring those pits for the 12 hours or 18 hours? Are they capped and then you come back? What is the chain of custody of those pits as far as when they're done, the level that's tested, and then along that time?
That's a very good question. So we actually, for the first few hours, just for that reason, it's a difficult, time-consuming test. For that reason, and in conjunction with Pannoni, we actually were taking hourly readings while we were on site. At one point, I want to say maybe after the 4th or 5th hour, I don't remember, I'd have to go back and look. Pannoni and Whitestone agreed that we would leave for the night and go back. There was no movement in the water when we left after that 5 hours. We had gone back to the site. It hadn't rained that night. The entire area was fenced off in accordance with OSHA standards. You can't leave something open overnight. So we blocked that off. And we also had the bucket of the excavator over the top of it. And when we went back the following day, the water was still up. You have to do a 12-inch head of water on top of it. It was still measured at 12 inches by both Pannoni and Whitestone.
And that was my second question. I know it probably didn't rain, but there was no rain that night.
That's correct. Yeah, we have to perform the test when it's not raining because it will impact the test results.
We didn't have any rain. I don't think August, but all right. Thank you. That's all I have.
Any other additional comments, questions from the board? Okay. Open to public? Need a motion?
Motion to open to public.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, if there's anyone from the public that would like to question this witness's testimony, please feel free to come up to the mic, state your name and address for the record. Okay. See no takers. Okay. Any other witnesses for yourself?
I have no other witnesses.
Okay.
I believe Mr. Ash has a witness in rebuttal to Mr. Kopaz.
Thank you, Mr. Kokas.
All right, again. Oh,
Forget how we have to do it. I'll swear you in.
I'm going to swear him in because it's been a while,
So
so.
you get tonight will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Pick up the mic.
Spell your name, please, Mike.
Yes, the name is Clay Emerson, Clayyemerson.
So again, Jordan Nash, represent Green Hills Community. The objector, this board will, I assume, recognize Dr. Emerson.
Yeah, as long as there's no change in status of your credentials.
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So, Dr. Emerson, have you had a chance at this time to review the Whitestone September 1st report?
Yes, I have.
And have you had a chance to review the Pannoni October 3rd report?
I have.
And you just heard the testimony that was given by Mr. Kopaz, is that correct?
I did.
Okay. And are you able to reach a conclusion based on that and all the prior testimony, whether or not the applicant at this time complies with the BMP manual for the purpose of changing the HSG soil categorization?
Yeah. Unfortunately, my conclusion is the same as it was before, and that is that they don't. And the reason for that is simple, and I think I said it like you did in your opening statement this evening. All I wanted them to do from the beginning is comply, and I I think this was the point of my testimony where I said, this isn't my opinion. It's just, the DEP lays out a method on how to do this. They're very specific. I think I even used the example saying, they don't want people just saying, oh, there's a puddle on the site, so it's D, so I'm going to I'm not going to do groundwater recharge. So they have very specific criteria on exactly what you need to do, and not just what you need to do, like the committee man was saying earlier, but where you need to do it, how many times you need to do it. So there's no games, there's no gray area. It's a black or white issue.
Are you able to explain in detail why they continue to fall short of the requirements?
Yeah, and in this instance, it's very simple. BMP manual in chapter 12, table 12-3, and the paragraph above it states very clearly, for depending on how big of a site you have, how many tests you need to do in order to reclassify the soil. And you have a copy there.
Yeah, if it's helpful, this has been previously marked as Exhibit 05. It's Chapter 12 of the BMP. That's what I'm going to put. It's already marked. I'm just going to put it in front of Dr. Emerson to assist him now.
Yes, so I'm, for the record, looking at page 8 of 05. And that's where it lays this out. And, I guess I probably should mention like why this is important. I mean, the one profile pit where they did an infiltration test is on the edge of the site. It's not on the center of the site, and it's just one, most importantly, it's just one location. And that's especially important. I mean, the DEP recognizes this thing. That's why they have, documentation like this. I mean, the site, as I testified to my first time up here, is underlain with fractured bedrock. And I talked about having done an aquifer pump test, a hydrogeologic investigation right across the street on this same aquifer. And you don't need to be a hydrogeologist to understand fractured rock, right? It's solid rock in places, and then there's fractures. That's where it got its name, fractured bedrock. So it's there's a lot of infiltration that happens in the fractures. All the flow, all the infiltration, all the people with drinking water wells in this aquifer get it from the fractures. So to do one basin flood test, I'm not criticizing his choice of that test at all. I want to make that clear. I'm just, it's my opinion, and I think a statement of fact that for a 9-acre site, one is not sufficient. That's certainly my opinion, and it's DEP's as well, apparently.
Looking at page 8 of 05, under where it says number of soil explorations required. On a 9-acre site such as this one, how many soil profile pits and infiltration tests would you expect to see? Let me finish the question, I'm sorry.
Sure.
In a situation where an applicant is trying to change the HSG soil categorization.
Correct. And I think that's an important distinction you make, because what they went out there to do was not pick a location that was convenient to put in an infiltration system. They were going out there, or they should have been going out there with a totally different intent, which is the plans that are before the board should not be in their head. They should be going out there, this site is undeveloped, and I'm trying to reclassify this entire 9-acre site as a D soil, when the NRCS and everyone else says it's a C. So they picked a location, in my opinion, and from how the report reads, where they thought they could fit an infiltration basin into their site plan. But that's irrelevant. This testing is before the site plan. This is to recharacterize the whole site. So for example, what if the area under where they want to put the warehouse is perfectly suitable? Well, we don't know, because there hasn't been a test on there yet. They don't want to put one there because they plan on putting a building there, which, but unfortunately, what they went out there to do, to reclassify the whole site, they should have been looking at a clean slate. And instead they, in my opinion, tested on the far edge of the site in one location, in a location that they thought they might be able to fit an infiltration system in if they have to. The reality is we're starting from the beginning, and they're trying to convince all of us and all of you that they don't have to. So it's two different objectives. But coming back to the black and white, there's one test, and I think your original question about how many should there have been, and I think it should have been more like 4 or 5 if you go through the couple paragraphs here on the bottom of page 8.
I think it's important. Can you take us through how that's laid out in the soil mapping units just very quickly?
Yeah, and I don't have the precise site characteristics on the tip of my tongue here, but it says, I'm going to read down again, page 805, item C, under number of soil explorations required when the soil mapping unit is greater than 2 acres, and I'll remind everyone the site is some 9 acres. The vast majority of which they're proposing to revise this mapping, where the HSG is unknown for a mapping unit larger than 2 acres within the limits of the overall site, in addition to the required numbers in item B, which by the way, I believe is a single test. In addition to that, a minimum of 1 additional soil profile pit and 2 additional borings shall be conducted for each additional 2 acres. And so there's an additional 8 of those. That's 4. So I think I said 4 or 5, and I stand by that. If I were actually tasked with doing this, I would get it right.
I'm sorry. I didn't cut
Yeah,
you
no,
off.
that was all.
So in a situation where an applicant is unable or unwilling or just doesn't do the actual approved infiltration testing for a mapping unit of any size, what's the result there? Do we have something to go on in terms of HSG soil characterization?
Yeah, keep in mind that the HSG on this site is not unknown. Look at the map. There it is. It says C. I think we're kind of losing sight of that. They disagreed with that, and so this is the extra length that you have to go if you want to disagree with that. The soil mapping on the site is clear. It's Penn soil. It's a C soil. So it's not unknown here. They just don't agree with it.
Okay, so on August 24th, were you personally out on the site?
No, I had a representative from my office, Mr. Marshall Thomas, there on my behalf.
Okay, what was your role on the site that day? Or what was Princeton Hydro's role on the site that
Sure.
day?
No, we were grateful to be at the request of the chairman and the board to be present, to be given the opportunity to be there and to have eyes on the site and observe what was being done, frankly.
Anything other than observe?
No.
Okay. And moving on now to the Pannoni October 3rd report. Specifically, their characterization of your testimony of the peak flow analysis and the exacerbation of flooding issue. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I was. What's the word? Bless you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was disappointed because there was some confusion in our initial report. There were, I think, 5 or 6 revisions to the plans over the preceding months, and we had used one of their designs that was like the design before the current one. We had used some characteristics of their basin, and when that next hearing, I made it clear that indeed, Mr. DeSessa picked up on that, and we had since put in the current data. The January 26th plan set, I think was the date. I'm not completely clear on which revision that was. But that the findings, and you'll remember I displayed hydrographs when we talked about it, the findings were essentially the same. I think the increase instead of 12 CFS was 8 CFS. So it was still my opinion that the the project as proposed was going to, despite the reductions, when you look at the site in isolation, I don't disagree with a lot of that. But when you look at the site in context of the flood-prone neighborhood and the drainage area that flows through the site, onto the site and back off of it again from other areas, in combination with that flow, was going to increase the peak flow that ultimately leaves the site. I stand by that, and in my very recent response, which presumably the board has.
It was sent to Mr. Bernstein and Mr. Pannoni.
Okay. I made it clear. I went back to the hearing, the video that's on YouTube, I guess is where I watched it, and put the exact link and the minutes, the timestamp of when I made that clear. And I also reiterated during that hearing that the applicant's engineer responded and provided some calculations, and those featured yet another revision of the detention basin, which isn't even on the plans, as far as I'm aware. They haven't been revised. So I would encourage you to look at that statement and to go back to, I think it was between 11 minutes and 15 minutes in the recording from that hearing. I just really wanted to be clear about that, because I think there was some misunderstanding, and I know there's a lot of time in between hearings and those kind of things happen, but I wanted to be sure that was clear, and I hope it's clear in this record as it was in the last one. So, in summary, my opinion that this project, as designed, is going to increase the volume and, most importantly, the peak flow rate of stormwater runoff leaving this site. And that's especially critical here because of the well-documented flooding concerns in the adjacent neighborhood.
Thank you, Clay. I don't have any more questions right now.
I'll be brief. Dr. Emerson, you indicated in your prior testimony that you're an expert in stormwater management. Is that an accurate statement?
Objection. We've already qualified this witness.
I'd love to answer the question.
I know you would, but I don't think you should have to, because we've already qualified this witness.
I'm specifically asking about stormwater management, not geotech. So, is he an expert in stormwater management?
We've qualified this witness
Okay.
appropriately.
Okay.
I think we should hear the answer to the question.
Go ahead, Clay. The floor is yours.
All right, so I have my undergraduate from Rowan University. I worked at a land development engineering firm after Rowan University for a while. Then I went to Drexel University, and I spent 3 years there traipsing around detention basins for 2 summers. I personally surveyed 115 of them, built a hydrologic model simulating all 115 detention basins. It was published in the ASC Journal of Hydrologic Engineering. A couple different papers came from that. From there, I worked with Dr. Rob Traver at Villanova University, where we started a research center just focused on stormwater management from 2003 to 2008. We designed stormwater BMPs. We worked with industry partners, instrumented all these stormwater systems, infiltration systems, detention systems, with pressure transducers, rain gauges, everything under the sun. It was EPA funded, also funded by the PADEP. I also did various consulting things during my time there. Ultimately, did research on stormwater management at Villanova University, published papers, and for the last 15 years have focused on stormwater management at a water resource specialty firm. I just got here from giving a presentation at the Pennsylvania Stormwater Management Symposium on stormwater. That's my everyday thing. So I guess that's the long way to say yes.
Okay. So over the last 12 months, how many stormwater management systems do you think you've personally designed?
Objection, none of this is relevant. He's a qualified witness, very qualified.
I can ask these questions.
These are essentially, you're going down a harassing line of questioning. I mean, you can get one or two of these out maybe, but you can't go down this line of questioning.
It's not your decision. It's the board attorney's decision on what questions are admissible or not admissible. I'm asking him if he designed stormwater systems. I think that's relevant.
Well, we've qualified this witness, and then he just qualified himself pretty well.
I want to understand if he's in academia or if he's in the field.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's a fair question. We should hear the answer.
Go ahead, Clay.
No, I'm very, very much in the field. Your question was 12
How
months,
many,
I think?
over the last 12 months,
right.
can you estimate how many stormwater management systems you personally designed for land use applications?
Okay, that was a different question than you asked me the first time.
Well, let's clarify which question we're answering.
Yeah, which question is it?
Over the last 12 months,
Gotcha.
can you estimate how many stormwater management systems you personally designed for land use applications?
So the answer to the first question is different than the answer to the second question. The answer for the second question is that our firm, we're not in academia. We do a lot of restoration work. We do a lot of floodplain management work. We do not do a lot of land development because we don't have a civil design component to our business. So developers are typically not our clients when it comes to land development because we're not laying out parking lots. So for land use applications, I have not designed any in the last 12 months.
About the last 24 months.
It's not in our business.
So you don't design stormwater management systems for.
Objection, this isn't relevant at all to his ability to read the stormwater management rules, which we already qualified him earlier as he helped design.
Frankly, it's not part of our business model.
I think
I would ask,
that's the answer.
is designing and as opposed to being able to study a system any different?
Oh, excuse me, we do design them, but his question was, do we design them for land use applications? No, I do design stormwater systems on a routine basis. In my role at Princeton Hydro, I'm more often reviewing them, either for municipalities in a similar position as Mr. DeSessa is here. But yeah, we do design them, we do install them, but they're not supporting land use applications.
So you're not, quote unquote, a developer's engineer.
I wouldn't be, no, I guess not. You could understand how this might affect my ability to get clients.
Have you been employed or retained as an objector in other cases, in other municipalities?
Yes.
How much of your practice is devoted to representing objectors to land use applications?
How much of my practice, my personal work? Probably 5%, maybe less.
Earlier when Mr. Ash was cross-examining Kyle Kopaz, he referenced a quotation from the engineering handbook, and I'm going to read it for the record, open quote.
Where are you reading from?
Reading from the Whitestone Report A3, page 2, it's very brief, open quote. In some cases, saturated hydraulic conductivity, quantitative measured characteristic data are not always readily available or obtainable. In these situations, other soil properties such as texture, compaction, bulk density, strength of soil structure, clay mineralogy, and organic matter are used to estimate water movement. Would you agree that that's an accurate statement?
With all due respect, Mr. O'Grady, I think you fail to understand the fact that they did do an infiltration test. They did one. So that statement, that's what the paper says. There's no doubt about that. That statement is a true statement, but they could have done more. They just chose to do one. You understand? So
Yeah.
all those other grain size tests, that's great. That's just not approved. That's not in the BMP mail. It's not an acceptable test. It can point them in a direction as he suggested, but when it comes down to it, it's black and white. They need to do infiltration tests. They can do, so the statement is irrelevant. They can do. In fact, they did do it. Problem is, they did one. So I don't understand.
As we sit here today, do you have an opinion on what soil classification that this soil is on site?
Do I have an opinion?
Yeah.
Well, again, it's not unknown. If you pull up the map, it's a C. There's no question. It's not even mapped as urban land. It's a C soil. It's
So-
a Penn series. It's a C soil. That's what the map says.
So
That's
the
my opinion.
map's always absolutely correct.
I'll ask you to
That's-
finish his testimony before you jump in.
I didn't say that the map was always correct. You asked me what my opinion of the soil on the site was, and I gave you a clear answer.
But you've never even been on the site, right?
I have never been on the site, right?
And you've never done any testing on site.
I have never done any testing on the site.
Who from your office was on site?
I believe I stated that earlier, Marshall Thomas.
Why didn't you go to the site inspection if you're testifying as to soil classification?
Objection. Princeton Hydro is here as the engineer. Clay is their representative right now. There's that question is irrelevant.
In that last round of testing at the end of August, did your staff say, hey, wait, guys, you got to do more testing?
I gave my staff clear instruction that he was there to observe what they were doing. Frankly, I thought the fourth time was a charm, but he was there to observe what they were doing, and that's what he did.
In light of the substantial drought in the month of August, if you went on site and saw that there was standing water, would that have changed your opinion on the soil conditions?
Objection. That's speculative.
Can you? Well, I guess the short answer is
Well, wait. You got to rephrase that. That was
Yeah.
entirely speculative. He can't speak to ifs, ands, and buts.
Well, he didn't go, right?
You've established that.
Okay, so if you were to, as a hypothetical, if you were to go on site and saw standing water in the middle of a drought, would that be indicative of soil class D?
not at all, because did it rain the day before they went out there?
I believe the testimony was it was a week prior in the middle of a drought.
I didn't hear that.
Well, let's assume that.
We
No,
don't.
let's not assume
Okay.
the testimony.
All right, we're going to cut to the chase.
The answer is still no.
No.
There's wetlands on the site in different places. The fact that there's a puddle,
Right.
again, I said it before, this is exactly why the BMP manual is so specific and why we sat at these stakeholder meetings and got this thing to where it is, so that there's no games. There's no saying, well, if you saw a puddle, would you agree that's a D? No, I don't want to hear about puddles. Just black and white, do the test. This is exactly why this is so darn specific and tedious.
Who directed the scope and location of the tests in August?
Objection. How would he know that?
I wasn't involved in those conversations. Neither was Miss Marshall Thomas in my office.
Do you agree with the conclusions in the Pannoni October 3rd, 2022 memorandum?
In their entirety?
Do you
No.
agree?
No.
Where did Pannoni err?
Would you like to look at the report to help answer that question? I have a copy of the Pannoni report to help the witness answer that question. It is marked up. Would you like to give him a clean copy?
Just use.
So it's broken
Can you
into.
reference the date of that report, please?
Certainly, thank you. October 3rd, 2022. So it's broken up into similar sections that my March 29th or that my earlier report was. So with respect to water quality, ultimately, He agrees that the application as it currently is not consistent with the water quality criteria. And that it would be provided. So I don't have any objection there. With respect to water quantity, yeah, I do disagree there, and I guess we'll need to get specific here. Says I'm quoting the October 3rd, 2022 letter, says the objector's expert contends that the application did not take into account the flood-prone areas adjacent to the site. And I stand by that. Again, this is the drainage study that was asked for, how long ago was it? Like 9 months ago, a year ago? When was the first request for the drainage study?
I'm not sure.
Okay. It was a long time ago. That was never done. We did it. That additional 166 acres. And so I disagree respectfully with his conclusions there, primarily because he, I think, unfortunately failed to understand my testimony at the last hearing. And I guess I'll quote this here: "We concur with the applicant's engineer analysis that the basin volume used by the objector's expert in the analysis was incorrect." And like I said, we corrected that. It was minor. It didn't change our findings. It was still an increase. And he goes on to say, quote, "With the same analysis would actually result in a slight decrease," yet he didn't do that analysis. Neither did the applicant's engineer with the plan that's submitted. So no one's done that analysis in this room with the plan that's submitted except for me. So I disagree with the findings in water quantity, and then I disagree with the findings in the groundwater recharge section for all the reasons that we just discussed. To sum it up, I just think that they should be required to comply with the BMP manual if they disagree with the soil mapping on the site. The soil mapping on the site is not a big mystery. It's there for everyone to see on the NRCS maps. And if they disagree with that, they just follow the manual. And that's not what they've done.
But you, as we sit here today, you don't know the correct soil classification for the soil, right?
The correct soil classification for the site is what's met. And that is Penn Series C.
No further questions.
I just want to ask a couple of redirect questions to Dr. Emerson. Has the applicant provided enough? Well, let me retract that question. If you come to a site and it's mapped as C soils, do you necessarily have to do any infiltration testing whatsoever?
The only infiltration testing you would have to do is to actually design your infiltration system, your rain garden, your BMP to satisfy groundwater recharge. But the only reason you would have to do any other testing is if you disagreed with that.
So in a situation where that additional testing wasn't done, an applicant would have to necessarily rely on the NRCS mapping. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I think what's been sort of, one thing I just want to make clear, on this application, is it your testimony that you know what, I don't have any more questions.
I just want to make sure I'm clear. So I asked a question before about, there was testimony that there was that additional paragraph that basically said if certain things couldn't be done or were unavailable, that it kind of led you in a different direction. I want to make sure I understand what your position is, that essentially because they did one, it leads you to believe that you can't then claim it's unavailable or not doable. And as a result, they should have done more, which based upon that chart, should be somewhere, as you noted, I'm going to say, I don't know the number, 4 or 5, give or take, right?
You said it much better than I did. I appreciate that. And again, going back to the geology here, it's fractured rocks. You can see why, multiple tests, especially where you have, fractured rock where, the water doesn't flow through solid rock, it flows through fractures. Why a single test might be even more problematic for an entire 9-acre site.
So it's certainly conceivable that their tests could have justified that it was a D, but they didn't do the requisite number of infiltration
Absolutely.
pits to test to be able to verify that. That's your
Absolutely.
contention.
Yes, that was a much more concise statement than I could have made.
I try sometimes.
Yes.
He's been here a long time.
Yeah.
Plus, he's a numbers guy, so. So,
Guys, one quick. So from a standpoint of the importance of this soil classification, C versus D, obviously the water infiltration versus runoff, right? So the crux of the matter is that a soil sample D, for example, is not PERC, we'll use layman's terms for guys like me. The advantage of classifying a C soil and being able to do infiltration testing or pits, what is the end game? How does that help the situation?
Yeah, well, I think you have to view it in context with the other issue that I still have with the application and with the Pannoni report. Sure, sorry about that. I'll just repeat that. Yes, your question is a good one, and it needs to be considered in addition to the peak flow concerns and the flooding concerns downstream, because providing groundwater recharge is the only method, the only way in New Jersey anyway, that where the regulations require you to actually address some of the volume that you're going to increase. Even if they do comply with the groundwater recharge, which again, they're arguing that they need not comply with it because they disagree with the soil mapping. Even if they did comply, they still be increasing the volume of runoff leaving the site. And their applicant's engineer testified before that that's not a requirement in New Jersey. They're allowed to do that. They're allowed to send more water downstream. He's correct about that. I want to be clear about that. But in light of the upstream 166 acres, and they've ignored that. They haven't done the offsite drainage analysis. And in addition to that, they're not providing any groundwater recharge. So to cut to the chase, when it's raining like it sounds like it is now, if they were complying with this, and if they agreed with the sea soils, they'd be required to design infiltration systems, and a portion of that rainfall on a day like today, perhaps all of it, if we just get a 1/4 inch of rain or a 1/2 inch perhaps, wouldn't leave the site. Would go into the ground where it probably is going now, despite a puddle there might be on the site. So yeah, it's significant. It's one more thing on this development that's in a sensitive place from a flooding standpoint.
So, question I've got is, because I understand, we're talking about, the NRCS has already classified it. Is there a difference when you want to change that classification, the testing requirements, versus we don't know what it is and we need to figure it out ourselves? Or is it same requirements regardless?
That's a good question. Again, that no one really changes it in terms of the NRCS. The only way that this whole thing is set up is the DEP gives applicants a way to disagree with it if they find something different, because occasionally the mapping, it's not perfect. It's not, I always tell staff, when you look at the lines on the map, that's not a finite line. Like there's but it's usually I think I use the analogy, the soil map is like the menu, you expect, here's what we expect to find. and they're usually pretty good. You know, sometimes, yeah, there are things that are different. That's true. But they're usually pretty good. There are very few places where it's more of an unknown, even on the maps, and they'll say like urban land or like, you know, there's some weird things. That's not the case here. And the method would be the same. And it's all right here.
I don't claim to be a stormwater expert, but I've been in the environmental field a long time, in different areas. But if something is so critical in terms of regulatory interpretation, because it's just the nature of the beast where two people might look at a reg and disagree, looking at the same thing. But I know a common practice is certainly reaching out to somebody, you know, from the regulatory agency and saying, hey, what do you think? Is that common in stormwater, in terms of saying, hey, I've walked onto the site. I don't think I have to do this. I don't think I have to do that. What do you think? Does the DEP get engaged at a certain time, or is it just kind of like at the very end, they review it and it's a decision made at that time? Or is it I know with a lot of the contaminated soils, now the LSRPs are the determining factor. Like, how does that work in terms of the decision process with DEP?
Well, ultimately the decision process, you submit and then
Right.
you get comments or whatever. But the lead up to that, I think, was kind of your question. And I think that's one of the reasons that, that in this case, this appendix for the soil testing criteria is over 50 pages, because they really want that to be, they don't want to have a pre-application meeting for every land development application that's going to come to them. So they write the guidance document so that they minimize those back and forths, and they expect when people come to them to have at least complied with this. And by complied with this, I mean do one of the 6 tests outlined on page 29 and do the right number of them outlined at the bottom of page 8. And they did finally do one of the tests, subsection A3 basement flooding test, but they did just one of them. And that's all I've been saying from the beginning. From the first time I showed up here, is I think that they should just follow the BPP.
Right. So it's, yeah, I mean, what I was going to say, I mean, in that sense, it's black and white in the BMP.
Right.
Okay.
They wanted to take, in my opinion, they wanted to take the judgment out of this and make it easy for them to just review an application, check the box, and move on. This shouldn't be qualitative, or gray.
Thank you.
Any? Yeah, I don't need to do a motion. We're still open, correct? For the public?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so if anyone from the public would like to question Mr. Emerson on his testimony, please feel free to come up. It's not up here. Any takers? Any other witnesses?
Witnesses right now?
I'm sorry, what'd you say, Mr. H?
Oh, so I don't have any other witnesses,
Okay.
but I think Mr. Testa may have had something.
Yeah, can I just ask a few questions for clarifications from the witness?
Sure.
Okay. So you indicated there was a representative out there in the field for. Okay. That one of your representatives was out in the field with the applicant and a representative from my office to witness a test. Were you in communication with them at all while they were out there?
I spoke to him in the mid-afternoon, I believe. I don't know exactly what time.
Okay. Was it discussed what was going to be done on the site at the time for the additional testing?
Was it discussed between whom?
Between you, with your representative?
Between me and him?
Yeah.
Yeah, I asked him, I said, what do you think they're planning on doing? I said, be sure to ask the representative from Panoni, like, do you think that they're doing everything by the BMP manual? And he said that he would ask your representative that question.
Okay. So he was involved in something of a decision-making or a consensus of what the testing would be done out there.
Right.
That's what I want to get to, because I just want to let the board know we strove to come up with a method that was going to be acceptable to everyone. Not that we just wanted to proceed with whatever the applicant wanted to do. And so based on the 3 test pits that were out there and the fact that they're all very similar, the decision was made to focus on one basin flood test. And that's, I just want to make it clear, we didn't want to proceed in a vacuum. We were trying to get consensus among the field people.
Yeah, just direct Clay to a point of that to, let you speak for yourself. But you said it was mentioned that Princeton Hydro was involved in the decision-making process. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't.
Is there a difference between fractured rock and weathered rock?
Yes.
And this site has fractured rock as the restrictive layer, or weathered rock?
Well, so bedrock, as you get closer to the soil, it starts to look more like soil, and as you go down, the soil starts to look more like rock. And that blending area where some people might call it soil, some might call it rock. I think the technical term is saprolite, but that weathering of the bedrock turning into soil is one thing. And that can happen regardless of your bed, whether you have fractured bedrock or not. So what this site has, to answer your question, is both. The bedrock is fractured and it weathers to soil, depending on the log you're looking at, within 5 feet. So the site has weathered bedrock, and that's not different than, or not, it doesn't exclude the fact that it's also fractured bedrock.
I just want to place an objection on the record because you've never been on the site. So you're testifying as the soil conditions on site that you've never been to.
He's testifying on the data that's been provided by the applicant.
And
which-
publicly available data as well.
And he also
The
testified
question
that
was
his knowledge
just-
of the area, so.
The question wasn't even site specific. It was just a question
Okay.
between weathered rock and fractured rock and the difference.
Oh, yeah. And when people say fractured rock, a fractured rock aquifer, for example, is an aquifer that, a lot of people here probably have residential wells. And, how does water come out of rock? Well, it doesn't. It comes out of the fractures in the rock. So you can have an aquifer that's rock, but it can provide you with drinking water, because there's fractures. And hopefully your well intersects a couple of those fractures or it's going to be dry. So this site is underlain with, and this is, I don't need to go to the site to say this, like this is in the original Whitestone report in their kind of review of site mapping, geologic mapping. It identifies it as it's fractured bedrock. And, there are geologic maps you can look at for that. It's not something that's going to vary from one property to another. These are bigger geologic formations that, like I said, although I haven't, done a geologic investigation of this site into the characteristics of the bedrock here, I actually did do one right across the street, which is about as close as you can get at Duke Farms.
Okay. So if there were fractured rock on the site and we did the basin flood test, wouldn't you expect that we would have some infiltration
Now,
test?
I'll tell you exactly what I would expect because I've done basin flood tests on the sites with fractured bedrock. I would expect you to find a couple test pits that water doesn't go anywhere in and a couple test pits where you can't keep a drop of water in it. Because water doesn't flow through solid rock, it throws through fractures. So if your test pit didn't intersect a fracture, there's no water that's going to go anywhere. If your test pit did hit a couple fractures or a zone where there's some fractures, you're not going to even be able to keep the water in it. It's going to drain out so fast.
Agreed. So, I mean, it's conceivable, you may have to hunt for a lot of different places to find that place that you hit fractures or not. You may, even if you did the tests, the quantity that were in the standards may not hit a place that actually had some fractures that would provide infiltration.
That's possible. Be nice to know, but that didn't happen.
That's all I have.
Okay. So I just want to get a clarification getting back with all these test requirements and stuff. Is it a guidance or nice to have, or are they saying, as you quoted, so many test pits per every 2 acres? I just want to get that because I think we've established we've had one is what the applicant is relying on. I want to know for certain that, you know, the regulations are actually stating that you must test
Yeah.
X amount.
I wanted to answer the question, just want to clarify for the record, the document I put in front of him is 05, as was before him before.
And that's the
That was
latest.
page 8, you said, right?
That's chapter 12 of the BMP, the soil testing criteria chapter.
Which is the latest iteration.
Of the BMP?
Of the BMP.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, revised, actually in November of 2020, which I think was the first time that they went out there. So I think you said it was much before that, but it wasn't. It was this same month. Anyway, yes, the subheading on that section, I'll read it. Number of soil explorations required is the word it says, not desired or it'd be nice, or it says required.
And everyone's staring at each other. What do we do now? I was watching the time. We're going to take a 10-minute recess because Michael's been going nonstop for an hour and a half. So.
Before we get the last bite, yeah.
Right. So we'll reconvene. We'll say 9:15 according to that clock. right. Okay, we're back in session.
We just have some brief rebuttal to Mr. Emerson's testimony.
Okay, just for everyone in the audience, the applicant's back up at the table for a rebuttal, so.
Good evening again, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. A few items as part of rebuttal. First, I think there's something getting lost between.
I don't have.
Mike, why don't you ask him a question?
Did you have an opportunity to listen to Dr. Emerson's testimony?
That is correct.
Could you provide a response?
Sure. The first is based on the type of testing that was provided on site. There seems to be some confusion or discussion regarding our basin flood test compared to the hydrologic soil group reclassification. Per DEP standards in the BMP manual, if you're doing a soil reclassification, you can only look at the upper 40 inches of the site. Bedrock that was encountered on this property was entirely deeper than 40 inches. So although we can do one basin flood test, it was outside of the upper 40 inches and is not applicable to the hydrologic soil group reclassification. Now, as you and I had spoken about before, the methodology we decided to use was a hydrometer test. This provides us a K value and is actually used in septic design by the NJDEP in New Jersey. It's an approved method. It's for septic. It's not approved in the BMP manual. But as we stated before in the engineering handbook, when certain tests that are outlined in the BMP manual aren't applicable, we all agreed on site that they weren't. We went with the hydrometer testing. It provides a K value, and consistently across the site, we conducted a number of tests that all confirmed that there was clay on site with very low K values and poor permeability. It is effectively an infiltration test. It is a different way. It's a laboratory test. It's not in situ, but it is a way to prove that those upper 40 inches are not going to infiltrate, and that is what we did. The other item that I wanted to bring up is, I guess, related to the NJDEP. Mr. Julian, you asked if any correspondence was had with them or if they were involved in any way. And as the professional testified to before, generally not. A lot of times they lay out these rules and you follow them. We are in DEP review, and they will be made aware of all the testing that was conducted. If they come to the conclusion that more testing needs to be done, we're willing to absolutely adhere to that. We want to do everything right by the NJDEP. Now, with that said, anecdotally, on other properties and projects that I have worked on personally, that I have done this methodology and submitted, it has been approved and it's been successful. Again, at the end of the day, my goal is to design the system correctly. If we assume that something is not going to infiltrate and it can, that's bad. If we assume that something can't infiltrate and it can, that's also bad. We need to design for what is actually on site. And again, I'm sitting here in front of you testifying that this site is a hydrologic soil group D, and we need to design the site as such, if approved.
And is it your testimony that NJDEP ultimately has the exclusive jurisdiction over the stormwater management design?
I would say so, yes.
No further questions. Done?
I'm sure you're going to be cross-examined, right? Because it's hang tight.
All of that other hydrology testing, all of that, none of that is approved infiltration testing under the BMP manual. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and you also spoke of the K value. Your K value, I believe, on your older report was a K0 value. Does that sound familiar to you?
A K0, generally speaking, yes. So that is any soils that are less than 0.6 inches per hour.
Okay, well, 0.6 inches per hour on what I'm looking at here is Chapter 7 of the Hydraulic Soil Groups, Part 630, Hydrology, National Engineering Handbook. You familiar with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So at a site where our depth to high water table is greater than 40 inches, Table 7.1, a value of you said it was 0.6?
I believe that's correct. Oh, I'm sorry, is it 0.06? No, it's 0.6. Forgive me, I'd have to see the chart I'm sorry, it's 0.2 to 0.6. Anything below 0.2 is a K0.
Okay, so 0.2 is the high level for a K0.
That's correct.
Okay, so 0.2 on this chart actually puts us in HSGC soils. You familiar with that?
For certain types, yes. When we went through that chart previously and given the depth to bedrock on the site, the limiting layer, again, as directed by Pannoni, that failure, it could be classified as a hydrologic soil group D.
But I'm looking right here. Now, I'll
If you
show it
don't
to
mind,
you
if I
here.
could see it, please. So if the depth to water table, again, if you look here, is greater than 40 inches, which is in this case, I don't know why this bottom number, depth to high water
Well, that's not
table.
what it says. It says depth to, you're looking at depth to high water table is the second column there. So we're
Yeah, and then we're depth to water table here. So then anything under, I'm sorry, 0.06 inches per hour is a D. That's
So you
correct.
said your high level of a K0 got you to 0.2, correct?
No, I'm sorry, I mistestified and misspoke as far as what the values were.
I'll stand here and represent to you that on your report, the high level of K0 is 0.2. So is 0.2 not a C soil on that chart?
I testified that I'm sorry, in our report, which report are you referring to?
I believe it was your May report from this year. If I could take the time to pull it out, but I'm representing it for purpose of this testimony right now. So I'll let Mr. Gronick tell him if he wants me to pull it out.
Pull it out.
I'd also like to, in the same table, if I may read through, an impermeable layer has a K saturated less than 0.01 millimeter, I'm sorry, yes, millimeters per second, or component restriction of frag pan, durpan, a bunch of other technical terms, which is actually testified to, which this does, bedrock as well. In addition to that, seasonal high water table, which wasn't necessarily identified, but the static water standing on the top, indicative of non-infiltrating D soils.
You'll have to bear with me. I was expecting to pull this out. I'll go find it. So I have a copy that I'll show to the council, and then I'll put in front of the witness here. It's the May 20th, 2022 Whitestone report. I'm going to refer to Appendix B. Just one second.
That's fine.
Mr. Ashiano, please.
I believe it's the PDF page 47, about there, 48 maybe. It's Appendix B. It's got a big triangle on it like that.
Page 46 is the beginning of it.
Okay.
I got
All right, so if we look at the permeability inches per hour for class K0, can you read to me the high of that?
Well, the inches per hour for a K0 is less than 0.2 for that K class.
Okay, so less than 0.0 or 0.2, does that not, in that chart, put us in HSGC soils?
It can in some cases.
No, the words on that page is what I'm asking you about.
No, but also hydrologic soil group D is also less than 0.2. Understand what I'm saying? So while they both can, the indication of standing water at the surface combined with the fact that we have clay mineralogy that is consistent with a soil
No,
group
you're not
D.
listening to my
And
question, sir.
yeah, I am. You're asking if a K0 can be a C.
No, I'm
And-
asking you if it is a C by the numbers on the page. This is quantitative.
It can be. It can also
Is
be
it
a
or is
D.
it not? Read it.
Anything less than less than 0.57 inches per hour and greater than 0.06 inches per hour
Would point
is
to-
a C. It will in some cases, and also anything less than 0.06 inches per hour is a D.
So now we're relying on one infiltration test and other hydrologic tests that actually put us in HSGC soils. I don't understand why we're still here. Can you help us?
I'm sorry, why are we here? We're testifying in front of a board for an application.
How are you relying on this test right here to tell me that you have these soils?
This in conjunction with everything else we've done on site, the history of the site, the history of flooding, which has actually been documented by your professional in the area. It is my professional interpretation, and again, quite frankly, with the DEP, I believe when they review that it will be a hydrologic soil group D.
And that's, again, despite the one infiltration test and the hydrology test that you're relying on showing me C.
That is showing you D, actually.
We just went through
On this
the
bottom line,
again.
it's saying D.
But
It,
point two
it,
gets us to C.
I
Is that
did
incorrect?
not say the value was 0.2. I
That's
said
what
the,
K0 is.
no, it says less than 0.2.
And less than 0.57, but greater than 0.06 includes 0.2.
That's correct.
And that puts us in C, yes or no?
D, which we also confirmed, which is less than 0.6. When we did the basin flood test, the answer was 0. So it's 0. So that's below the hydrologic soil group, which I testified to, and then everything above, which we were doing as part of the reclassification, still falls under a D
But you're
classification.
trying to tell me that you did testing in addition to the single basin flood test. But now you're relying on the basin flood test to get you into D from C here.
No, I'm stating for the record that all the hydrologic soil group testing we did, which includes all of the hydrometer testing, combined with the standing water at the subject site at the surface over an extended period of time, greater than 72 hours, which is provided for infiltration on a site in a passing basin, it is site soils consistent with a D classification.
And nonetheless, we're still standing here relying on, as approved, this single basin flood infiltration test.
And as I testified, if NGDP sees it fit for us to do additional testing, I certainly will. I sat in front of members of the board engineers, and as well as the objectors engineers, and we had a full conversation about the testing that needed to be conducted. I repeatedly mentioned how I wanted to do any and all types of testing. Everyone, and you may object, including Princeton Hydro, was in agreement with the methodology that was being used, and Whitestone too is consistent that this is a hydrologic soil group D classification.
Well, I do object because I know that Princeton Hydro, as they testified, were there to observe and to observe only. But that's all the questions I have for you.
Thank you.
We have no further questions for Mr. Kopaz, who just
I guess I just want to get a clarification. Why did you not choose to do the BMP method or the methodology you decided to do? Well,
Because we couldn't in the field, and Benoni agreed to that the methodologies for other infiltration testing in the
you're
upper
the
soils.
applicant and he's not your consultant. Why did you make the decision?
Because it couldn't be done. It's
Why-
not accurate.
why
It
couldn't
couldn't
be
be done. It was
The number of pits. That's the number we're trying to get to. Why?
Because I've already done the correct number of tests in the upper 40 inches. I've already done way more than's required. I've done upwards greater than 20 tests across this site. I've already done the right number of tests. They're just claiming that a hydrometer test isn't accurate. Now, the basin flood test, which is outside of the hydrologic soil group, because it's below that 40 inches, we could do all the basin flood tests we want. It still doesn't change the hydrologic soil group reclassification process. Now, if we determine that those upper site soils were a C, we'd have to rely on infiltration on the lower rock, which we also can't do. So again, and as Benoni memorialized in their letter, which Whitestone agrees with and also asserted in all of our letters, there's an upper confining layer of soils in the upper 40 inches and then non-infiltrating rock. That's consistent with a soil group D.
Can I ask you maybe a little differently?
Sure.
And it goes back to the question I asked Dr. Emerson. Why were you able to do one and not 8 or 5 or 4 or whatever?
We were prepared to do as many as we wanted
Well,
to.
prepared to and doing are two different things. My question was,
Because
you did 1, why did you not do 4?
Because we were already in accordance with the BMP manual. This was purely, the last mobilization that we just did with the basin flood test was purely at the request of the board and the board's engineer for additional testing. I am confident that we were already in compliance with the BMP manual.
So
Can you cite out of the BMP manual?
I'm sorry?
Could you cite out of the manual where you said, where it says to do one?
I was reading before. The BMP manual references the engineering handbook in chapter 12. And when you go to the engineering handbook, we were actually just reading through the table here. That's the language that I used when talking about difficult soil conditions and using alternative testing methods. And that's why we did the hydrometer test. Again, due to limiting site, this is in A3 as produced by Whitestone. Due to limiting site conditions, including variable thicknesses and depths to limiting layers, as well as the presence of gravel, the methodologies of field infiltration outlined in the BMP manual do not provide accurate data with respect to field conditions. Per the engineering handbook, quote, in some cases, saturated hydraulic conductivity, a quantitatively measured characteristic, data are not always readily available or obtainable. In these situations, other soil properties such as texture, compaction, strength of soil, clay mineralogy, and organic matter are used to estimate water movement. That is laid out in the BMP manual and referenced there. And that's why we took that approach, because we thought it was the most effective and best way to get the hydrologic soil grip on site.
So the same question I asked before, if you were able to do one, so let me maybe ask you a different question. Dr. Emerson indicated you did one, and then you relied upon the claim that there other data or other possibilities weren't available or accessible, or whatever the terminology is in the BMP. Why could you do one and not others?
So a basin flood test is actually the only one that's specifically designed for rock infiltration. There's also a pit bailing test if there's standing water that you can actually dig out and take measurements. Those are the only ones in rock that are really applicable, quite honestly. And as you get higher and higher, as we mentioned, it does start to weather and get a little bit finer grained, but there's very heavy gravel. It makes doing that in situ infiltration difficult and quite frankly, unreliable.
But you were able to do one.
The basin flood test, that's correct.
Correct. So why couldn't you do more?
We could have done more, but by the time we mobilized, the basin flood test, again, doesn't apply to the hydrologic soil group reclassification. So the only reason we did the basin flood test was because Pannoni and the board, we wanted to get the board engineer to understand what the site conditions were. We had already tested previously and felt that we were in compliance with the BMP manual. The last mobilization was purely to satisfy a request from the board and to have the board engineer and objectors view what was going on. So I could have done 7, I could have done 0 and still been in compliance with the BMP manual, in my opinion.
Okay. I guess I look at it that coming off the last hearing that we had, there was obviously considerable discussion, concern over whether or not there was compliance with the manual. And I guess I would have hoped, expected, liked, I don't know, whatever you want to, that rather than, kind of get up to the line and maybe, in your expert opinion, say, I think we're good, rather than make sure that every possible angle could have been covered. And we didn't get that. And for wherever you decided to do that, we didn't get there. So, and that's a little, given the context of the discussions that we've had prior, I would have hoped you would have taken the more conservative approach as opposed to, just doing bare minimum.
And we definitely take that into account on future projects. While I was on site, I will reiterate, it was a group decision, including with your board engineer.
He's not your consultant. That was your decision. Do not try to pin anything or on him. I mean, I know he was there to witness and stuff, but at the end of the day, your decision. You had the ultimate decision.
Fair. And then
not a group decision.
That's correct. So then, as I stated before, we were in compliance prior to that mobilization. So if I did 0 tests or I did 250 basin flood tests, I'm still in compliance with the BMP manual.
And I did just watch the last hearing that we had, and the direction from Committeeman Del Cor was first to Pannoni to just review all the data, and then if additional testing was necessary, that we do more field work. And that's exactly what we did. And we followed. I mean, that was the direction. It wasn't Whitestone, we want you to do X, Y, and Z. It was defer to the board engineer. The board engineer is knowledgeable in this field. He had an expert go out, and we did exactly what the board instructed us to do. Follow the direction of the engineer.
We didn't tell you how to do it. What was there was enough doubt that needed to be done again. Another attempt. The applicant made the decision on how to do that attempt. Not our professional, not this board. We instructed if there was enough doubt, we needed to do it again. And you did it again.
Right.
Based on what you thought was the best. And I'm not saying you.
Right.
I'm saying
Right. And
Whitestone made the decision.
and I've been at a lot of hearings where, not here, but it needs to be emphasized, I think, that DEP has jurisdiction over the stormwater management design. Now, we understand that we want to accommodate. We've gotten way far in the weeds, 10, 12 hours of testimony on soil. But at the end of the day, it's an outside agency approval that we need to obtain.
You also need hours.
True. And we're trying to comply.
No, I
with,
know,
you
but
I
please,
mean,
because we've heard this, in other applications over the past couple of years, DEP. Well, we got a say in here too. There's a reason we'll come through here. Otherwise, if there was none, you just go right to DEP. So I don't want to hear that anymore. Okay. Yeah, we've put some requirements out there or requests. So just for the record, there was enough doubt. New test was done based on Whitestone's professional opinion, what would satisfy. So no one gave them direction exactly how to do it. Okay. And I kept seeing Mr. Asher, you guys were going up and down a couple of times, so.
You
No.
gotta use the mic.
Mike.
You have to use the mic.
Mike.
I just wanted to respond to the legal point, and I didn't want to interrupt because I'm in full agreement with your position, Mr. Sirachi. I would like to emphasize, though, that the DEP process recognizes that the planning board applications are a significant opportunity for an objector to be heard. They actually do not grant hearings to objectors in DEP processes because they get their due process, or so they say, at the municipal boards. I've actually written articles on this. I have concerns about due process in that situation, but because that's the state of the law, this board cannot just defer to DEP. And I think you understand that, Mr. Sirachi, but that's why I was standing up, because I wanted to respond to that legal point.
Okay. All staring at each other again.
Are we still open to public? I guess we still are, right?
Yeah, we're still open to public, but we haven't closed.
Yeah.
I just want one housekeeping item. I just want to make sure the Pannoni letter is entered as an exhibit.
It's part of the application. It's up here on in Civic Clerk, so
Okay.
it's part of the file.
Can I just mark it out as A5 just for the record?
Sure.
I've lost track of all the different, where we're at, but we are still open to the public, and I think there was additional testimony by the witness. So if anyone wants to come up, and Susan, I know you wanted to come up. I'm giving you a chance. There you go. No one says you weren't. Just don't complain about the height of the mic.
Susan Gulliford, Hunt Club Road. Okay, we've been listening for 2 hours now to the battle of the experts, a lot of technical testimony, and I kind of want to cut to the chase on this. If this application and the board had depended on just the pit and the first test and the first report without the objector, without all the additional testing that was asked for, the additional reports that came in, all the rest of it after your initial report, they had just depended on that. And you've also refined your design since then based on all this additional information. So I have kind of a two-pronged question. Was your first design not your best design? And the second part is, what would the result have been post-construction if all this additional information had not come in? Would it have been more flooding for the people behind there?
Sure. To both questions, quite unfortunately, I don't do design. I'm not a design engineer. I guess in other applications I am. But when it comes to stormwater management, that design engineer had already testified, so he'd have to speak to that. I just report the field conditions. I don't do actual design. And we've been consistent that the site has been a Group D from my perspective the entire time on the project. So I don't necessarily know if things change. I know site design, and from a civil design standpoint, that's the case. I can't testify whether how that changed or how that was affected. And then as far as your second question, if a system is poorly designed with the wrong soil condition, sure, there can be flooding. I can't comment to what amount or how it would impact the surrounding area, though, again, I didn't do the design.
Okay, so what applicant's expert would be able to answer that question?
I believe Mr. Ford, who already testified.
So I lost my chance?
Yeah, you already testified.
We can't recall him?
Board can.
The board can,
If you wish to. It's here. Sitting here, so if you wish to.
Well, let's finish.
well,
the
let's, we're
testimony.
gonna finish this, yeah. If there's anyone else that would like to,
Rich Garman, Winding Way.
Could you put this infiltration test in like layman's terms? I'm assuming you took a track hoe or a backhoe, you scooped out to a certain level, filled it with a certain amount of water?
That's a basin flood test, correct.
Okay, so you did one bucket down a certain level on 9 acres?
No, we've done over, I would say, upwards of 30 different locations on this site.
Infiltration test.
Well, hydrometer testing, that's a laboratory test, which is another way.
But the bucket test is
The basin flood test, to supplement everything else, we only did one
I'm just looking
location.
at it logically, between me and my neighbor, half an acre between our 2 built-in pools. When they dug his pool, he had to put in a dry well and everything else. They dug my pool, they went down 10 feet, didn't hit water. So one bucket doesn't, on 9 acres, doesn't seem to really qualify.
Sure, we have upwards, this site has been, we actually have a handful of maps, some of which are included in exhibits of our testing locations across the site, and we've tapped the top of bedrock pretty consistently at relatively the same depths. So we were consistent that the site conditions were consistent across the site. And then we did the basin flood test. Again, all our laboratory testing we thought was compliant. And you're right, I mean, one location for the one basin flood test, if that's all we were doing, we would have to do more for BMP compliance.
You had the equipment there, you stuck the one bucket in, you went down 40 inches, filled it with water, you couldn't drive over while they were filling it with water and do a couple more spots?
We actually dug 3 different locations. We only did the basin flood test in one. We excavated 3 different locations while we were on site. So the one test they're referring to is the only one basin flood test. But we did with the backhoe, dig 3 additional ones.
So why didn't you just dump the water in and avoid all this?
I guess a decision was made by a team of people to not do that.
Okay.
In an attempt to appease the board engineer, we decided to go with one test location.
any other members of the public? Okay. Mr. Ford, the board would like to recall you.
Michael, sorry.
Yeah.
You swearing in testimony tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
For the record, can you state your spelling name?
Michael Ford, F-O-R-D.
And nothing has changed in your credentials or status since the last time you appeared? Okay.
Susan Gulliford, Hunt Club Road. Okay, if this application and the board had continued this application based only on the first report and the first test that was done, without all the additional testing, all the additional requests, without the objector's expert coming up, the 2 questions were, and the design having been changed, refined. as more test information came in. Was the applicant's first design not the best design? Second part of the question, what would the result have been post-construction if everybody here had just depended on the first report with the first pit? Thank you.
Okay. I think that first, the subject that we've been talking about for the last 2.5 hours regarding recharge has no direct bearing on our analysis or calculations on the total quantity, that aspect of the peak discharge from the site. In fact, part of my testimony months ago was that for the quantity analysis, we've used hydrologic soil group C from day one. We haven't taken advantage in the quantity analysis, a change from C to D. And as the ejectors engineer, I think for the first time admitted tonight that there's no obligation to reduce the flow, the peak flow, or the volume at some point down site, and that our obligation is to meet the quantity reductions that are a point of discharge from our site, not an overall more regional analysis. And since day one, we've complied with the requirements of the reductions for the 2 10 and 100-year storms. And as Mr. Grodnick relayed earlier, I think at the last hearing, we outlined how the changes that we've made have resulted in even a further reduction in those peak flows. And I think that's a better design, a reduction.
Okay, and you just said you have no obligation off site. You mean like the houses like Johansson?
Well, no, I would, throughout this process and tonight, we've heard many references to detailed sections in codes and requirements that are black and white. Well, it's black and white in the code that when you add impervious coverage to a site and you compare the existing runoff from the site to the proposed condition, you're going to obviously increase volume, but the code doesn't require you to reduce that volume. What the code requires you to do is specifically for the 2-year storm, if you have a discharge in the existing condition of 2 CFS, you have to reduce that by 50%. So your analysis has to demonstrate that your post-development peak discharge at the point of analysis is 1 CFS or half of the existing, and so on for the 2 or the 10 and 100-year storm. And we've complied with that reduction requirement since day one. And that's black and white in the code. And as I stated at the very beginning and throughout this process, when there's opportunities for us to do better, like the board suggested, that if you can make the basin bigger, and this was even discussed at the Environmental Commission, and it results in perhaps some more, and I'll call it temporary disturbance of vegetation, woods, because as I testified, the area where we're exceeding the 60% maximum disturbance of woods is not going to turn into pavement or parking or anything other than being revegetated, because it's part of the expansion of the basin and then the restability and revegetating of that basin. So where there were opportunities and suggestions by the board where we could do better, we didn't say, no, we want to stay at 59.8% disturbance of trees and not spend more money to make the basin bigger and disturb more trees. We did that.
Might just follow up, but part of the stormwater is, regulations is relying upon doing those recharge calculations as well, correct?
Correct. Right. That's one aspect.
That's
one of the 3 aspects is recharge. And you heard it ad nauseum, when you have a de-soil, you're not obligated to do recharge. So starting from the premise of a change from C to D, there's not an obligation to do recharge. But I will say to the board, if I were to do recharge, minimum satisfactory per test, and I think both geological experts have said this today, or technical engineers, you have to do permeability tests on site. One of them would be potentially a basin flood test, which is a pass-fail. And then other permeability tests that yield results, you'd have to have a result of 1 inch per hour minimum. In this case, other test data have shown much less than that. But that would be a step past a final determination of the classification. If it's a D, you're not doing that.
Anyone else?
Grant Comer, 144 Taylor. Mr. Ford, with all due respect, I just want a yes or no to the question. Okay. Will there be more water that has flowed into the Green Hills neighborhood because of this development? With context, a yes or a no?
More water volume, yes.
Thank
yes.
you.
Mr. Ford, I know he asked you for a yes or no. Would you like to elaborate on that answer? Guys, come on. Let's be fair. He's an engineer, and
I
think we're trying to be fair here.
No, honestly, I feel that when technical engineers, we have an ethical responsibility. We have a license. We do, many calculations, and I feel like I've said it enough times already. And the people that will accept a responsible engineer's answer will do that, and people that won't, I really honestly don't feel that I would see anything that would change someone's mind at this juncture.
Brian Tarantino, Fairfield Lane. Mr. Ford, so I understand from the testimony that you guys are not meeting the tree requirement. You're at more than 60% because you had to make the basin bigger. Is that correct?
We didn't have to make the basin bigger. It was suggested, and it was actually discussed at not only this board meeting, but at an environmental commission meeting with members of the environmental commission, that they would prefer that we actually remove more trees if we could enhance our stormwater mitigation beyond what's minimally required in an effort to do better. And we did.
So was there an option? And so I understand, though, that there's not really, you're not allowed to go over 60%, even if the Environmental Commission prefers one versus another. Isn't that correct?
We've asked for relief, and the rationale for the relief is at the direction of the board and the Environmental Commission.
So is an option of making the building smaller one of those?
At one of the prior meetings, someone else made that same gotcha statement.
It's not a gotcha. It's a
no. It is because the applicant complied with the regulations and was under 60%, and they're willing to make the stormwater management bigger and better beyond what the minimum requirements are. But the trade-off is, at the prior hearing I described this, is that the additional 6% of woods that would be disturbed is really only temporary, because it'll revert back to vegetation and wooded area, because it'll be part of an enhanced detention basin, a green area.
So you guys are willing to do something good, but not at the expense of making a smaller building?
That's been the applicant's decision. That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Any other members of the public? Okay, no takers.
Closing?
Yep.
I don't really have too much to say. I just, we've had 6 hearings. We've had 20 hours of testimony. It seems to be focused on a very narrow issue. But I just want to emphasize that this project, the development of this property has been approved since the 1980s. This was phase 2. It just never got built. We're way under in impervious. We're at 45%, where 60% is permitted. We could have made the building bigger and complied. This industrial zone has been in place for decades. This industrial park has been approved for decades. And as Mike said in his impassioned testimony last hearing, we've done everything we can to try to make this a good development and to mitigate the impacts specifically on stormwater. And I want to mention one thing. There was, in the old detention basin, there was a preservation area in the middle for an old historic tree that had since died. So removing that additional vegetation, really didn't impact. The tree was gone. It wouldn't have been saved. So this is a permitted principal use in the zone. The variances are, again, the buffer for the fire lane. Again, we would eliminate that if the board doesn't want it. It's not required. We just discussed the trees, and the height is a mere few feet higher. And if you recall Mr. Reddington's testimony, this is a sprinkler building, so we have to account for the sprinkler and the lighting. There's a trend for higher buildings rather than wider buildings. We think that probably is in alignment with the goals of the adjacent neighbors. And we know you're all volunteers. We appreciate your time. We try to do the right thing, and we'll continue to do so. And we're going to try to continue to develop land in accordance with the existing rules. There's a lot of discussion about industrial buildings, and I get that. I certainly do. I'm sensitive to that. But I'm also sensitive to developers who are trying to build out the blueprint of what the town says they want. And this is an industrial zone. It's adjacent to industrial uses. Every single person that moved into that neighborhood, and I did check by deed, moved in after Harvard Way was developed. So it was an industrial zone when they moved in. It was adjacent to their property. Again, we appreciate your time, and we thank you for listening to this application. And would hope that you would see that if you apply the code and the permitted uses in the industrial zone, that this is a good application, and that it's been contemplated for this type of use since at least 40 years. Thank you.
Go ahead, and then I'll.
Well, in closing, from my side, I would just personally say thank you, everybody. Like Mr. O'Grinding touched on, you're all volunteers, and I do appreciate that. It gets late at these hearings, and you're giving your time, which is commendable. Again, as I said earlier, my client consists of concerned residential members of this community. And it's not an understatement to say that they are terrified of the continual flooding that is going on, not only in Hillsborough, but specifically in this area. The testimony is such that this proposal as designed will exacerbate flooding. With that in mind, I don't see how any variances or waivers can be granted, given that their own planning expert testified, and he was right, that flooding is one of the fundamental purposes of zoning. So not only have they not really given any justification for these waivers and variances that they're seeking, but even if they had, because they're going to cause flooding, they can't get any of them. And mind you, the tree variance does say in no event can relief be given. So this is an event. This would qualify. I will reiterate again that despite their many bites at the apple, they do not meet the stormwater management rules. And the recharge is not some small, offshoot in the stormwater management rules. It's one of 3 main performance standards designed to help, water quality and flooding and all of that. That's what water recharge does. It helps all of that. So it's not some small offshoot. It's important and it matters. And it really matters in areas such as these where there's wetlands and there's flooding and there's all sorts of those issues. So they could have come in and said the HSG maps, give it a C, and we're going to design a project in accordance with that. And then I wouldn't have had much to present to you from what Dr. Emerson was saying in terms of recharge, but that's not what they did. They came in and they said, we don't agree with the NRDC maps. We want to change it to D. And there are conditions to doing that. There are minimum things they have to do if they wanted to do that. They've not done that. They've tried many times. The testimony tonight is that they're still relying in large part on the prior purported testing that was done, which is not infiltration testing, and the investigation that was done. They're now coming here today having done 1 infiltration test, which is good for a mapping unit of up to 2 acres under the rules. We have a 9-acre site. That's insufficient for water recharge. Again, as far as water quality goes, they say they're going to do the water budget analysis. That also matters. That tells us whether or not their constructed wetland is going to operate as a constructed wetland and provide the benefits that it's supposed to provide. Now, their analysis very well could show that it's going to do that, but it also could show that it's not. But we don't know that sitting here today. So we just don't have that information. As far as the water quantity goes, they will increase volume runoff. Though, as Mr. Ford pointed out again, decreasing volume runoff is not a requirement of the stormwater management rules themselves. However, accounting for flood-prone areas is, and this is a flood-prone area. And we, again, have, if the testing wasn't done to show that the fuller drainage area was to increase peak flow rate, if that was never done, the board could rely on the fact that it's not required under the rules to do that. But that has been done. So we can't ignore that, and we can't not give consideration to the flood-prone areas. And it shows that as designed, this will increase the peak flow rate for the fuller drainage area. I don't know why we're still relying on the 1980s approval. That lapsed a long time ago. As we've stated, we can't rely on the DEP to review these applications. The board has an obligation to do so. And some applications don't even go before DEP, and the board has to review those ones as well. But even where they do go before DEP, the board has an obligation to give the appropriate level of scrutiny before it provides its approval. And again, in terms of the use that's being proposed here, I'm not sitting here before you saying they can't build a warehouse here. It's zoned for a warehouse. They have a right to do so if they meet certain conditions that are designed to benefit the greater community, to achieve the purposes of zoning, such as flooding. But they've simply not done so. And again, they've had several bites at the apple. There's no level of even conditional approval that can be given here. This is a project that should be denied by this board. I don't think the applicant, frankly, has given any leeway on that. I think because of the testimony that's been provided, this application must be denied.
Now, public gets their last opportunity, right?
Before we go to the public, I just have a couple questions. Maybe just for the record. I know it's been a while since we talked about operations. That was one of the first hearings. Has there been any change in understanding about who a possible tenant might be and what the operations might be regarding the warehouse here, so we could have some understanding of the operational impact?
Unfortunately, it's a spec building.
It continues to be,
Yeah.
to this point.
which is quite common nowadays, unfortunately, with these types of uses.
Okay. So I think we're going to go to the public. This is your opportunity to express your opinion on either your support or non-support of the project. So feel free.
There's no more questioning.
Right, there's no more questioning. This is just strictly your views on the merits of the project. So feel free to come up, state your name and address for the record. And, you know, we are trying to keep to the 10:30 time limit. So doesn't mean you get the full 25 minutes.
Okay. Brian Tarantino, Fairfield Lane. I'm kind of encouraged to hear the talk from the applicant about relying on the DEP. And I think that's awesome because they really are the authority. And so, you know, following the rules from the DEP and what the DEP recommends, I think is great. It turns out that the commissioner of the DEP, Sean LaTourette, was quoted in the Star Ledger dated August 28th, 2002, that LaTourette said, it's wrong to build any buildings based on the 1999 stormwater data that they have, and that they are working. I'm sorry.
Is that Article 2022 or 2002?
2022.
Okay.
August.
I think you said 2002.
Sorry.
Okay.
August 28th, 2022, page A13.
Okay.
Mr. LaTourette said it is wrong to build based on the 1999 data because rainfall has increased 2 to 10% since then. So I know we've had a discussion about this, and Mr. Chairman, you suggested that we go to Trenton to talk to them. I've actually talked to folks in Trenton, and I understand that the DEP is working to revise the stormwater rules, and that change in the rules is imminent. And so to build a permanent building, it's not temporary, right? You guys are going to keep it up. To build a permanent building based on data from 1999 that the DEP themselves say is wrong and no buildings should be built based on it, just for a matter of weeks or months until the DEP actually issues the revised, more current information, seems completely wrong. To approve a building like that, notwithstanding the excellent remarks and arguments that the objector has made, in addition, it would seem it would seem biased, honestly, to approve a building based on stormwater regulations that the DEP themselves say no building should be built based on these numbers. So just want to urge you to really consider that. It's not like, oh, maybe someday, maybe, years from now, the DEP will get their act together. No, they were ready. They were ready to issue. You guys know this, of course. They were ready to issue emergency stormwater regulations a number of months ago. There's now a process going on for rulemaking, and it's a matter of weeks or months until those regulations are issued. And to approve a building now would seem biased, honestly. So I don't need to accuse, I'm not accusing, I'm just saying it would have the appearance. I'm not saying you guys would be. It would just have the appearance of that, because why are we in a rush when we just need to wait for the DEP to get their, to get themselves
Tarantino, you
together?
know, by rule, the time of application dictates the rules that they abide by. So that they could pass that rule yesterday and the applicant wouldn't have to abide by that.
In all due respect, my understanding, I'm no expert, okay, but my understanding is that the stormwater regulations would apply to any building that hasn't started construction, even if it was approved. Even if the plan was submitted, the plan was approved, but the if the construction hadn't started, then the rules would apply to that building. That's my understanding. It's what I went to Trenton, so I found that out. Thank you for considering.
Thank you.
Rich Garman, Winding Way. I just wanted to mention that we flood in this town. We've seen it get worse and worse, and everybody's in agreement there's going to be more runoff. I don't know that the basins work. They didn't work in Ida. And now we have some disagreement. They did one infiltration test, and we have an expert who said, had they done others, they might have hit an area where there was a fracture that could absorb any amount of water you pour in it. So maybe we need them to do these tests and find where that fracture is. They put the basin there and we reduce the runoff and we don't add to the flooding. But everybody's in agreement. There's going to be more water. More water's going to be more flooding. Simple as that.
Frank Colmer, Taylor Avenue. I got a little bit of a script, but I may go off. I apologize. I'm looking down at my phone and look at you. I had just a question for the board was, and this is based on Mr. DeSessa's report. He gave that there was an alternative analysis for the objector's engineer stating there was a different sort of downstream. Was the board ever given that alternative analysis?
Yeah, I'm not sure which one you're referencing, sorry.
Oh, if I had it in front of me and if I had internet, I would say there was a calculation based on 166 acres, and that was not taken into consideration. I think there was 12 CPM, but then I just heard testimony about 8 CPM. That was a new analysis. I didn't see the analysis. I'm just wondering if the board had an alternative analysis from you, Mr. DeSessa, about that
I believe
contention.
That analysis was included in the applicant's, one of the applicant's response reports to the report from the objector's engineer.
Okay, it sounded like you had done it, and then I didn't know if the board had done it.
Reviewed it and basically concurred, but yeah.
Okay. I want to point out just in terms of that report, I have a serious concern in terms of how this is being presented and some of the one-sidedness that's being presented just to the board as a final summarization for your recommendation to our board engineer. This feels like a completely uphill battle. I feel completely dejected through this process, and perhaps you do too, night after night. The report, though, seems definitely corroborated, at least in some way, and I can't prove any of this, but it definitely seems to be a one-sided event. And I don't know if that's the case where you needed a report to give a yes and you wanted some sort of analysis to be done to justify your reasons. Gosh, I hope that's not the case. And I can tell you by your questioning you want to be informed and you're making the great decisions that I hope that you're doing for our community. But from my perspective, I hope you can appreciate it. It seems extremely one-sided, and that report does, even though it all agrees with the applicant's position. All of the arguments are made in contention to the objector's position, and none of it is recognizing what we as feeling within the community ourselves. So some statements, there's some contention. I'll just bring up one. Mr. DeSessa in the report injects his opinion relative to sort of taking into the flood-prone area. And if you look on some of that report, I wish I had it in front of me, but it's saying, the objector at least, noted that should be you should vote no or whatever, it should be denied because it's a flood-prone area and you need to take that in consideration. And Mr. DeSessa's report says, well, they did, and you could see from the applicants they may have done that. And this interpretation is all leaning on the applicant's position. Nothing to account for what we are talking about. There is a flood-prone area. There is going to increase flooding, and there's going to be more water in the area, and that's not acknowledged at all by the engineer, our town engineer. How disgraceful, I think.
Yeah, I have to jump in here because I object to that
line of opinion that we're biased or are on someone's side. We're professionals like the applicant and the applicant's objector, so we have to look at things and we advise the board of our opinion. So there is no taking siding. We have to give our honest opinion about things to the board. And it's for the board to decide. So I take objection to that insinuation, and I strenuously disagree with it. I just want to put that in the record.
Yeah, I would disagree with my statements as well. But it does seem dismissive in terms of always just affirming the applicants and not actually affirming any of the other side. And there is affirmation on some of the objectors' position, but then it's completely retracted in terms of agreeing with the applicant, giving no regard at least to what this area does. So that's just a perspective. And I'm just going to make my comments here as well. So that's it. I hope that the report that you do is not the justification you're going to use in terms of maybe applying for a vote or affirming this. So finally, just I want to consider the question of just why now, and you're hearing that before. I think why now? Because they're coming to you. And how long I've written this, I said Mr. Bernstein in here, and that's not the case. I've never seen this, so I apologize. But the project is, why can this? There are so many things going against this, right? I think we have a reason to deny. And there is some stormwater down analysis that I guess we're waiting for the engineer. Why isn't this taken into consideration? How can we possibly do this to the community within ourselves if that is not taken into consideration? You're going to add water to this community, and you're going to flood. We're going to lose the homes that we have. We're going to come back to you and say, this is not okay. It is not okay to do this to us. So I'm hearing it, and I appreciate some of the questioning that I'm listening to, but I just want you to know that this isn't okay to do to us. And this applicant had many opportunities to do so. And I appreciate the support in denying them the application. Thank you.
Maria Janusik, 720 East Freck Avenue, Manville, New Jersey. I'm also a Hillsborough Township property owner, Block 86, Lot 3, 2155 Camp Plain Road. I think that Susan Gulliford brought up something very, very important. What if there weren't objectors? So what if there weren't other reports? What would have happened? It's so easy. Everybody just, okay, pass it and that's it. And then flooding, it's not anybody's problem except the property owners. So that was excellent what Susan brought up, and that should be paid attention to. Why weren't all these proper tests done ahead of time? So when it came before the board, you could say, oh yeah, every test was done. Every test was done correctly. This is what it is. It's kind of like a sneaky maneuver. Oh, let's see what we can get away with. Now the applicant's archaeologist pulled out papers from like 1980. What does that have to do with anything today? It's a whole different look of the land now, and there's different laws, and there's a lot of flooding going on that probably wasn't going on back in the 1980s. That needs to be looked at. So why are these old records? How are they even coming up? What kind of archives are they pulling up to get these records out? And was that application actually approved back then for that warehouse? Because I think there were letters saying that there were certain things that needed to be done before that application was approved. The narrative for this application says that a submission waiver was requested for a community impact statement pursuant to code section 188-32E, and in parentheses, no impact to school-age children. Community impact, I think, would mean flooding. This community was flooded really, really bad. I was here when property owners came and spoke about how they were impacted by the horrendous flood that happened. One mother came up and she said her 4-year-old child, when it starts to rain, she starts to cry. She's got post-traumatic stress disorder. She's terrified. That's a school-age child. And why is it only impact to school-age children? What about all the people that live in that community? They're impacted with flooding. All these things need to be looked at. And my opinion is that this should be denied. Thank you.
Any other members from the public? Okay, I guess. Is there a motion to close?
Motion to close public.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
So we had comments from the board?
What? Yeah, some deliberation.
So, we've been at this one for a while now. And I know there's a significant amount of consternation in of the neighbors in the area, and we recognize why that is. That area's been hit really hard, and there are things that we're working as a municipality to try to see what we can do there. But that doesn't, I'm sure, alleviate your concern nor your fear. And it doesn't make what's occurred in the past any better. I get that. I will say the application, I do think, tried to do certain things. The applicant, as noted before, did some things with the basin at the request of the board. Granted, the building could have been smaller. I will grant you that. That wasn't always an option and was not one that was taken. But they did try to work a little bit to ensure that they were within margins on certain elements of the stormwater process. But there are also some things that I think need to be further addressed. And the reason I asked the question at the end was because we ideally don't like to do spec stuff because it doesn't allow us the opportunity to understand the other areas of the impact to the neighborhood, whether it's traffic. I know we had a traffic report, but the traffic report was based on a hypothetical tenant that we don't know what that's going to be. So unfortunately, we can't really make that assessment. We don't know what the hours of operations are. We don't know how many trucks. We don't know whether they're going to be working 24/7. And that's why we'd like to have some discussion on the operations of the warehouse, so it gives us an idea of what we can actually look at. But my bigger concern relates to the fact that, and it is sort of pointed to my questioning before, given the flooding impact, given the area and what it's gone through over time, I would have wanted to see that every I was dotted and T was crossed in regard to the testing. And maybe there were reasons that it wasn't done, but frankly, it should have been, because we've sat here for a year figuring out how we could make this project acceptable to the neighborhood. And we didn't get the most basic of, let's go over, make sure that we've got everything covered. When we sat here 4, 5, 6 months ago, whenever it was, and we talked about specifically the testing limitations and the testing gaps that we saw, and we didn't even get to that. And I know that there are elements of stormwater that I think were addressed correctly. To me, I don't think the recharge was, and that's one of 3. And I'm really troubled by that. Because of what this neighborhood has been subject to, I would have expected above and beyond. And frankly, I'm disappointed you didn't do it. So I'm really struggling here how to tell the residents here that we can move forward with this when you guys didn't even do the most basic of testing to make all of us comfortable. So you take that for what it's worth. And
Thank you, Frank. A lot of comments I have are similar to what Frank said, and I'll go back to, the original comment that this wasn't approved in 1980. Obviously, that was a long time ago. The dynamics of the town have changed. Let's not even look into what the environment has changed, et cetera. So that makes, in my opinion, no basis on this application, in my opinion. Statute expired. But what we're left with is mostly hypothetical. And the hypothetical is what the building's going to be, what the tenants are going to be, as Frank said, what the impact to the neighborhood is going to be. Take away the water, the traffic. We have a development was proposed that we tried to fight but lost that battle right in that same area. That will be affected, and those neighbors aren't here yet to even voice their concern that are going to be living right possibly next to this site. So I don't know, struggling with, as Frank, is to try and think of what justifications are, pro and con. I appreciate the testimony from both sides. I think they did their best. Mr. Ford in his testimony was very patient to explain his views and his math. And Mr. Ash commends and Mr. Emerson to the professionalism and preparedness that you brought to this. Quite honestly, it's probably with the board, probably the most stretched out application we've ever had because the information was so technical in some ways. But the site is stressed. Stressed now without any building. And adding building would probably, even if it's engineered correctly, possibly would be less, but we don't know that. The testimony is given that it will meet the standards. But I'm more concerned not only with the water, but the rest of the application. In my opinion, the answers there's too many unanswered questions than there are answered questions. I told the population, I guess over a year ago, that sometimes you have to make decisions that for a particular group of people that are hurting or stressed. And it may not be the easiest decision to make because there's two sides of this application. And let's be cognizant of that. There's a developer that has a piece of property that has the right to develop it. And then there's those people who are impacted by that development. And that's always the battle of the planning board, right? To plan accordingly and to pass the truth is the benefit outweighed the detriment. And I'm struggling with that also, Frank. We wish that the applicant had dug 16 holes or whatever. So I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think the proof was there. And I would think that they would have come with a application that was tighter, knowing the constraints and the concerns we had here.
Thank you, Mayor. All right. Neil?
So with that said, I'll make a motion to deny the application based on the theories and the comments that both Frank and I said, and anyone else, that there's just a spec warehouse. Number one is too hard for us to determine the impact to the neighbors, both in sound, noise, congestion, environmental impacts, And I feel that for any building that comes in for spec, you better prove it or have some sort of indication of what's there. And in this case, also the potential for more flooding in this area, I think is a concern that I cannot overlook.
I will second that.
Before I go to a roll call, I just wanted to add a couple of things in there. I know there was, just for clarification, I know there was a mention about the community impact statement. I just wanted to clarify that because that was my legislation that I put through many, many years ago. It was more designed from a fiscal or financial impact to the taxpayers. And when it talks about children or no impact choice, it was really about school population. That's what it was, the intent of that. So that, because I felt that was a piece of information, the planning and zoning boards never had in front of them and wanted to make sure that they had that. So that was the point of that. Just kind of, again, echoing to what the mayor and committeeman had said, there was opportunities. This board was kind of, I'm not going to say kind of clear. We were clear, that there were things we were looking for. I mean, there was one item that didn't even get brought up here, was about the downstream impact. I know there was a testimony promised to give a bigger pipe, but still no analysis there. And I think that goes to Frank's statement about going beyond, give more, to support an application. But, and also to what was already said about, spec. We kind of have that somewhat in our ordinance, not necessarily saying no specs, but it says, the applicant's supposed to provide, details on operations, whether it includes hours, true traffic because of, who the applicant is. So, yeah, it's essentially implied that the type of information or that type of application, would be expected, that there would actually be some idea of what the operations are. So that's all I wanted to add to that. I'm just going to give the remaining board members one last opportunity before we go to a roll call. Okay. Counselor, we're ready to go for roll call?
Yep.
Okay. So I will ask for a roll call on the motion to deny the application.
Mr. Peason,
Deny.
Mr. Aztec,
Denied.
Ms. Smith,
Denied.
Committeeman Delcor,
Yes, denied.
Mayor Lapani,
Yes, denied.
Vice Chair Julian,
Yes, denied.
and Chair Sarachi.
Yes, denied. So with that, I'm just going to ask everyone, because we just want to wrap the meeting up real quick. Just to remind the board, do we have a business meeting? Or we
October
cancel that?
27th, if you want to cancel, if there's nothing else.
Okay, so can I have a motion to cancel the meeting of October 27th?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Can we just do we need to do a roll call?
Yeah.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Peason,
Yes.
Mr. Aztec,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Committeeman Delcor.
Yes.
Mayor Lapani.
Yes.
Vice Chair Julian,
Yes.
Chair Sarachi.
Yes. And just a reminder to the board, we do have a meeting on November 3rd,
That's correct.
so it's 7:30 PM. So with that, I will entertain a motion of
to
adjournment.
adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Good night, everybody.